afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are looking after our mental health and leading a rewarding life, number 4, and thinking style. Speaker is Dr. William Davies. He is consultant psychologist and head of applied clinical psychology at the APT. Post-qualification courses written by him have been studied by over 125,000 mental health professionals, meaning that his input has influenced interventions with literally millions of people. So Will, it's all yours. I'm going to stop sharing.
Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming. And we've got number 4, thinking today, which is an interesting one because thoughts can be so intractable. They can be just so difficult to work with. And I'm sure you all know that in the jobs you're in. But I'm put in mind, for example, I think it was Mahoney, wasn't it? MJ Mahoney, who told the story of working with somebody who believed he was dead. And he tried everything to try and convince this guy that no, he wasn't dead, he couldn't be dead, otherwise he wouldn't be talking to him. And in the end, he hit upon a great idea. He said, well, look, do dead people bleed? And the guy says, no, of course they don't. They're dead, they won't bleed. And he says, well, do you mind if I do a little experiment with you then? And he got a little pin and pricked the guy's finger. And some blood comes oozing out of the guy's finger. And what does the guy say? He says, my word, he says, dead people do bleed. So once you've got a fixed idea in your mind, it's very, very difficult to shift it almost no matter what you do. So that's what makes thinking such an interesting area, I think. So let's have a look at what we've got. Just to start off with, though, this is the last in the series, Living a Rewarding Life. We're doing 2 parallel series, aren't we? And this is the Living a Rewarding Life series. We've done biology, we've done behavior, we've done social, the relationships. And today is thinking, how we think and what we think about. Okay. But of course, thoughts are indeed partly created by our biology, by what we do, by our friends and so on, just the previous things we've been talking about. So if we tick all those boxes, maybe our thoughts look after themselves. So let's just have a look at the context. If you have a life with meaning and you are living by your principles and you're doing what you are good at and you're getting good sleep and you're getting a good diet and good exercise, and you've got good relationships, then maybe surely everything else is going to look after itself, isn't it? Why do we need to look after our thinking? If we've got all those things ticked, all our thinking is going to be in line, it's all going to be great, isn't it? And in any event, if we look at the first two, the 2 I've put in bold, having a life with meaning and living by our principles, both of those are heavily to do with our thoughts and thinking, aren't they? The meaning is what we give to our life. Something like the meaning might be doing your job well. It might be looking after your family or your loved ones. It could be anything. It's the meaning that you attach to your life. It might be your hobby that you're very involved in. It could be anything. Living by our principles, well, likewise, those principles are entirely a sort of thought-based item, aren't they? They are things for us to decide on. They exist only inside our head, really. So there is an overlap between our thoughts and what we've been talking about earlier on. Not so much actually with the remaining ones, except, of course, that if we're fit, healthy, and so on, what do you think? Our thoughts tend to be that much more adapted. Either way, this is the plan we got for today. Number 1 is what we attribute events to. What we attribute events to, what we put them down to is important. Events are important, but what we put them down to is important. Number 2, neural circuits, networks and pathways, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So I'd like us to have a look at that in a little bit of detail, really. Then to look at thinking about things as opposed to problem solving, because there's a little bit of a trap there we need to examine. Mindfulness and distraction, I think, are two topics that we just have to cover if we're talking about thinking. And likewise, treating ourselves with compassion. And what to do is important. We just had an election, not a general election, but a big election, even so. And one party didn't do particularly well. And the sort of inquest afterwards is not whether they did well or not, but what to put it down to. What do we attribute the fact that they didn't do well to? Is it to the leader? Is it to the policies? Is it something that happened a few days before the election? Or what is it? That's attribution on a grand scale. But let's have a personal example. Following our Alan, he always seems to be the chap we look at. Alan, I think maybe something to do with starting at the beginning of the alphabet. Alan wakes up anxious at 3 a.m. and he asks himself why. So we've got an event happened, he's woken up at 3 a.m. That is incontrovertible, that's what's happened. But because it's 3 a.m. and he had a bit too much to drink last night, and that's just what happens when you do that, what action will he take? Probably nothing. Just try and go back to sleep again, and his feeling will be neutral. He might say to himself, well, these 3 a.m. wakings when everything seems terrible, they're awful, but I know they pass. He might say to himself, well, I'm going to drink a bit less tomorrow night or the night after or whenever it is. But basically, he's not going to do anything really, and he's not going to feel much either. It's just one of those things. If, on the other hand, he decides it's something deep inside him, he is an anxious person and probably always will be, what will his action be? Probably zero again, to be honest. But feelings will be, he'll be distressed, he may feel inadequate, he may criticize himself, he may reflect upon his past and why he's like this. He may really give himself a very, very bad time. The event has been exactly the same. It's a 3 a.m. waking after drinking too much. But it's the attribution that really causes the effect. You can see that in that Alan example, you can see what he'd be best off doing, but there's a general rule. If something bad happens, you feel better if you attribute it to something, A, that is outside of yourself, and B, that is temporary. If something good happens, you feel better if you attribute it to something inside yourself and permanent. So, supposing you fail your driving test, what might you put it down to? Well, what's that? That is something bad happening, isn't it? You'll feel better if you attribute it to something outside of yourself and temporary. So, failing your driving test, what could be outside of yourself and temporary? Well, it could be that the examiner was in a bad mood. Or it could be that your driving test just happened to be at a rush hour, at a time when the traffic lights had failed, you're taking your driving test. Could be something like that. Nothing to do with you. The mood of the examiner is nothing to do with you. The traffic jam, that's nothing to do with you either. It's both of those are outside of yourself and hopefully temporary, all depending on the examiner. What about if you pass your driving test? What might you put it down to? What might you attribute it to? Well, in this case, we're looking for something that's inside of yourself and permanent. Well, you might say, well, I put a lot of practice in. You know, I read all the stuff about what you're meant to do when you're driving. I sat all the lessons I was meant to have, and I did a lot of practice. Well, that's all down to me. I deserve to pass. But also, what about something permanent? Oh, well, that's also I suppose I have a natural affinity for driving. I'm just naturally a good driver. I am a natural driver. Permanent thing inside myself. So that is, and that, you say, well, you might say, you know, don't we need to know what is the correct attribution? Which of these various attributions is correct? Well, really, the correct one is the one that makes us feel best. Because when we feel good, we operate well for ourselves, for other people, and so on. And often it's really not at all clear cut, which is the accurate one. So it's just best to have the one that works best for us.
So we've got a question here. Attributing bad things that are out of our control to other things, is it possible that that prevents you growing?
Well, I'm not sure. It all depends on your frame of reference, I think. If you think that you grow best when you are feeling bad about yourself, then perhaps it would. But I think people learn lessons very well when they are feeling good about themselves as well, you know.
Well, and are our human attributes fixed from birth, or is there a parental influence?
Well, it's interesting because this is the nature-nurture debate, isn't it? And they do a lot of good research on this. And it seems to me that the more research they do, the more fixed things seem to be from birth. And certainly in terms of personality stuff, they call them stable personality traits. And of course, the clue is in the title. These personality traits are relatively stable. So how open you are to ideas, how conscientious you are, how extrovert or introvert you are, how agreeable you are, and how neurotic or stable you are. These tend to be fairly fixed. Not totally fixed though, and that's our jobs, isn't it? All of us here are working in that area probably, and working on it to the benefit of everybody.
Perfect.
Okay, is everything working okay?
That's a million times better, thank goodness. I was getting a little worried.
Well, yeah. No, it's my fault, but we're okay again now.
Although, shouldn't you attribute it to something else?
No answer to that one. Okay, let me put the full screen on. Now, this is, I think, one of the most interesting areas. This is the next section. It's good to retread neural pathways that lead to good places. Not so good to retread those that lead us to bad places. Now, this is leaning on a book by Don Hebb, D.O. Hebb. The Organization of Behaviour, it's called, published in 1950, and has been a bestseller ever since it was published. And there's this metaphor, I'm sure, about pathways and neural pathways. I'm sure it's that metaphor that really sort of is the selling point of that book in a sense. So let's have a look. Neuronal circuits, by the way, I think you can use the word neuronal or neural interchangeably. Some people say neuronal, some people say neural, doesn't really matter. Neural circuits established long ago are still operative, even though they may have been formed earlier than we can remember. So neural circuits that we had even before we could speak will be still operating. So, if we had lovely pleasurable circuits that when we were a baby and toddler and so on, we had lots of pleasure, those circuits of pleasure will still be floating around. And likewise, the opposite of that. So let's just have a look at a bit of background. A neuron by itself doesn't really do very much. There's a picture of a neuron. And in the brain, there's something like 100 billion neurons, more than we can imagine. In the gut, there's 500 million neurons in the gut, which are connected to the brain. So that is an important part that people are looking at closer and closer at the moment. But once events cause neurons to fire into circuits and networks, they can generate powerful emotions, neurons can, in circuits and networks, good or bad, good emotions, bad emotions, whatever. So once formed, a network can be triggered or reawakened by all sorts of events. So if negative networks have been formed, then sadness, frustration, anger, whatever, they can all appear seemingly from nowhere because we have that now existing network floating around in the brain. And something, apparently only slightly related can trigger off that network and give us a full-blown anger or sadness or frustration or whatever it would be.
Title of the book, Will.
Hmm?
Could you just repeat the title of the book?
Yeah, it's The Organization of Behaviour by D.O. Hebb, H-E-B-B. Wonderful book.
Super. I hope that's all right, Larissa.
Yeah, so hence people talking about emotional flashbacks. When people have been through traumatic events, only occasionally do they imagine they're actually in that situation again. But frequently they'll feel that same feeling as they had in that situation. It's not a delusion. They don't think they're literally in the situation. It's not a hallucination. But they feel the same feelings like they did in that awful traumatic event. So once formed, a network is very difficult to dismantle. It'd be lovely to think we could poke inside the brain and untie that network. But no, the neurons are wired together. It's impossible to do that. So often the best way forward is to provide events which stimulate new positive networks that compete with the old ones. That way, what we're doing is we are repurposing the neurons from the negative networks into positive networks. And that's probably the best way of dismantling them. And it's a little bit difficult to sort of grasp in a way, because what we'd really like to do is dissolve the original bad networks. And it seems a little bit indirect to repurpose the neurons into positive networks, but it makes entire sense, doesn't it? Then, of course, once we've got the positive networks happening, once they are existing, feelings of happiness, compassion, competence, they too can also appear from nowhere. Slightest little bit of triggering, and you just feel happy for no good reason. Developing a more positive disposition for us and providing a counterweight to any negative feelings when they are triggered. And it's a lovely feeling, isn't it, when you just feel happy for no good reason. You're sort of driving along, whatever it is, and suddenly you just have a wave of happiness. That's a network being triggered for some reason. Conversely, of course, it explains why getting the person to talk about times when they felt unhappy and helpless can actually encourage those feelings to appear subsequently, because you are rerunning that same pathway. You're prompting them you're sort of rehearsing that pathway. And Hebb's metaphor is that if you walk through a forest, the more often you tread that path, the more easy it is to tread that path. Equally though, if there's bad paths and you don't tread those paths and you allow them to overgrow, those paths fall into disuse and disrepair. So just as before, it is like treading a path through the forest. The more often you tread it, the easier it is to tread. So we need to be mindful about which path we take. It's better for us to tread the paths that lead to good places rather than tread the paths that lead to bad places.
So Zahid is asking, how can you retrain patients to think more positively, especially when the negativity stops them from having a good quality of life?
Yeah. Well, for a start, for example, supposing you're seeing a patient on a weekly basis. For a start, you can actually talk to them about good things that have happened. Rather than, it's difficult in the example you cite there, Amy, because if the person comes in and they've had a terrible week, and you say to them, oh, tell me about good things that have happened, well, that is very unempathic and unrealistic. So you really have to start by saying, well, what's the worst thing that's happened this week? Otherwise, you're just unempathic and unrealistic. But once you've had one or two of those things, then you can turn the conversation around to investigating some of the good things that have happened. Has there been anything this week that has been quite good or very good? Yes, on Tuesday afternoon, such and such happened. Well, what was that? What happened then? And there you are retreading that path. So that is, I don't want to make it sound an easy thing to do, But you can see the principle.
Super. And wouldn't not walking that path sometimes lead to repression?
Well, repression is an interesting thing, isn't it? It's the idea of repressing, not being able to remember bad things, not being affected by bad things. Most people, if they would think it was an entirely good thing. If you've forgotten the bad things that have happened to you and you're no longer affected by them, most people, I think, would say, well, that's good. That's a result. That would be what we're trying to achieve in therapy.
And in trauma therapy, getting patients to retread their trauma is often used. So would this not make the issue worse?
Well, in trauma therapy, there's a very good reason for that, actually, because often enough when traumatic events have happened, the person will actually blame themselves. Back to attribution again. For example, a lot of children who have had terrible things happen to them when they're young will actually look back on that and may blame themselves for what happened, or partly blame themselves. So it is important we go back and we kind of correct that misattribution, if you like. The other thing is that in trauma therapy is that you get the memories come into mind unbidden. They are spontaneous memories very often. And they can be very distressing for the person because it is a traumatic memory. So to go through it with a therapist in a sort of safe environment, and is sometimes quite in a fairly upbeat sort of friendly sort of way, that almost like neutralizes, doesn't quite neutralize it, but it does counterbalance the badness of the memory.
Super.
By getting a person to talk about past times, no matter how brief that they felt happy or any times they felt competent, will also encourage those feelings of happiness and competence to appear from nowhere. You are treading, though you're retreading that path, strengthening that path. Like treading a path through a rainforest, the more often you tread it, the easier it is to tread. This is a nice homework task. It's actually taken from solution-focused therapy. If anyone who's interested in solution-focused therapy, this is from that. Between now and next time we meet, I'd like you to note down any things that happen that you would like to continue to have happen. It's a nice, optimistic thing to do, isn't it? And you can say that to anybody. But why? Why would you ask such a things? Firstly, it brings a neuronal circuit that has a good effect to the attention of the person. Okay? It brings to the attention of the person something good happening. Therefore, a good neuronal circuit. Secondly, the very act of the patient noting it down retreads it for them to a degree. It's a bit like noting down a dream. It helps you to remember it. It firms it up. It gets that circuit established. Same thing here. Something good has happened. You note it down. It firms up that absolute circuit that you've got. And of course, it gives us a chance to talk about it next time and retread that circuit some more. It gives us the chance to talk about positive things next time. Really good thing to be able to do. Now let's have a look at, this is a picture of a brain that I did with Mark Betts. And I've colored it in blue for the thinking area of the brain, cerebral cortex, cerebrum, either name will do. This big red one here represents the limbic system, where emotions mainly come from. So you got logic in the blue, emotions mainly here. And then there's the cerebellum, it looks after balance and all sorts of things here. Then the brainstem, all about breathing and heart rate and so on, going down the spinal cord. But it's interesting to ponder the neuronal firing that we call emotions and the neuronal firing that we call thoughts. So neuronal firing in the blue bit, neuronal firing in the red bit. Of course, those are neuronal firing in different parts of the brain, but you can normally trust different parts of the brain to interact with one another. And that's very much what cognitive therapy relies upon, isn't it? that we're talking to the blue bit of the person, the cerebral cortex. We end, as it were, talking sense. And we're hoping that it transmits somehow to the red bit where the emotions are. And to a degree, there is some transfer. So we, in whatever therapy we are doing, can concentrate on triggering circuits that have a good effect on us. Now, of course, some circuits, there's no law that says, well, any particular circuit or any particular network mustn't straddle two of these elements here. So sometimes when we're listening to great music or music that has a good effect on us, it might be predominantly affecting the red area, our emotions, but it might also be affecting stuff in the blue area, our memories and so on. So when we say, listen to music that has a good effect on you, it's very difficult to, for example, define good effect in what way. Makes you remember good things, or just makes you feel vibrant and good and energetic? Doesn't matter. Whatever you take to mean a good effect, that is it. And might be several circuits taking place in different parts of the brain, all triggering off good effects, interacting with each other, and so on. Now, some people say, well, yeah, but that's okay, but surely we need to talk about past bad events, don't we? And I think we covered this a little bit earlier on. Probably not, except if there's a good reason to do so. And sometimes there is a good reason to do so. And we mentioned this to correct misattributions, for example, where someone blames themselves for something that happened when they were a child. It's not reasonable to do that, So if there's a good reason to talk about past events, yes. But the idea that simply talking about past events is a good thing to do, I just don't know the evidence for that. People do like to do it, but I think that's an unhelpful thing generally to do. So what we need to do, if we can, is to fire the feel-good circuits, the circuits that benefit us in some way. So music that has a good effect on us. Friedrich Nietzsche said, without music, life would be a mistake. Lots of people have said something similar, haven't they? One of the most reliable things, if you're feeling not so great, is to play music that you know has a good effect on you, and have a playlist of music that you know has a good effect on you, and get it played. Equally, though, there are films which have a good effect. Most people don't like repeatedly playing films. The effect wanes, you get bored and so on. But there are genres, types of films that have a great effect on you. And things like Netflix will keep track of your genres that you like, the type of films that you like. And if you choose them carefully, that can be a terrific thing. Likewise, people. Some people just have a great effect on you. And they might not on with other people, but some people will have a great effect on you. Equally, unfortunately, some people will not have a great effect on you. So it's almost good to keep track of what films, people, books have a great effect on you. Games, topics of conversation, anything else. I kind of withheld having a comprehensive list here, Ames. I was thinking that somebody might want to add things. You might say, well, yeah, okay, there's music, films, people, and so on. But anything else could we put to that list that we could
Somebody is enjoying watching Friends a lot on TV.
Fantastic.
Somebody's enjoying chocolate, exercise, being creative, pets, nature, food, dance.
Brilliant. It's amazing because they come flooding in like that, ever so easy like that, and which is wonderful. But it's amazing. I don't know if we reflect on talking to some of our patients, some patients find it very, very difficult to think of anything that they do has a good effect on them. And partly that's because of their history and so on, but partly it's because they haven't sort of catalogued it like that. Now, some of the people you mentioned there, Ames, they clearly have. It's lovely.
There's all sorts of lovely things coming in.
Yeah.
Really nice.
I think the other area when we're talking about thinking is really important. we've sort of mixed together our thinking and our neuronal firing. I think quite reasonably, to be honest, because thinking and emotions are very semantic type of things, but all of it is what's going on in the brain. So I think to talk in terms of neuronal firing is quite a good idea. So, but at night time, of course, we have something else. We have dreams. And what is that? Is that thoughts? Is that emotions? What is it? It's certainly neuronal firing, that's for sure. So what we need to do is to have music, films, people, books, etc., that are likely to lead to good neuronal firing during the night. So that's really important, because the quality of the sleep, what goes on in your brain during the night, has a terrific effect on how you wake up and how you live your life. So to have a fruitful night's sleep, a peaceful, restful night's sleep. You get a lot of people who say that they wake up more tired than when they went to bed. A lot of depressed people will recount that quite routinely. So we do have to try and help them get a good result during the night. It's funny, I was listening to, I was reading a book actually on Sunday. Very, very heart-wrenching book. It's one of my favorite authors, and he'd written it with his wife, and his wife was dying. They'd been together since they were at junior high, as he terms it. In other words, since they were, what would that be? Somebody in America could tell us, about 15 or something. And he says they got ribbed and teased for they'd be holding hands at school. They were just so in love at school when they were 15. Now they're 87. And they've been together constantly through then. He rushed through his medical training because he wanted to be back with his intended. And they've been married for whatever number of years it is, now 87 years old. And she's dying. So this is their joint project to write this book about her dying. And it's absolutely heart-wrenching. I was reading it on Sunday, and I got to the phase where she died. So the project now is all down to the husband, and he's busy completing the project. And of course, he did complete it because I'm reading the book. But it's just too poignant and heart-wrenching for words. And what do you think? Did I have a good night's sleep on Sunday night? Did I? Heck, I had a terrible night. Monday was awful. So, and Tuesday wasn't much better. To be wrecked like that overnight is really, really, really bad.
We're getting people requesting the name of the book, please.
Oh, do you really want it?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Oh, somebody's taken a guess. Terry Ann, is it A Matter of Life and Death, A Matter of Death and Life, Irvin Yalom?
Well, by Irvin and Marilyn Yalom, in fact, yes. Irvin and Marilyn Yalom, A Matter of Death and Life. You're absolutely right. It's that way round, A Matter of Death and Life. Well
done, Terry Ann.
Yes, very well done. Yes, he's a fantastic author, and that's why I was reading the book. And he writes like an angel. It's amazing. But just the subject matter is too much. So yeah, so that's but the topic I was trying to get across was really to help people to have a good night, good neuronal activity through the night. Okay, so that's the end. That's the end of that section, Ames. That's if anyone wants to say, or if you want to say anything about it. What time are we at? Oh gosh, time's going on.
That was a good section. But Lorena's mentioned that he gave a speech yesterday about that very book.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
Irvin Yalom?
Sounds like, yeah.
Gosh, because he is getting on a bit now.
Apparently it was amazing.
Oh, fantastic. Next section then. There's a big difference between dwelling and brooding about something and problem solving. Dwelling on problems is not so good, but problem solving is. Some things just need to be addressed. And what you can do is to write down all the options you've got, write down their pros and cons, and choose the ones you fancy. That is kind of problem solving technique. So just thinking about problems, which is what a lot of people do, they'll spend hours, days, weeks and months thinking about the same problem. They're not thinking really about the solution to the problem. They are simply dwelling and brooding about the problem. And that is not good. That is walking along a really unattractive path constantly, a path that is doing you no good whatsoever. Whereas problem solving is very good. You don't have to use that three-stage process. Of course, you can just address the problem in whatever way you like and get on with it. But when I was writing this, I was reminded of some people just have a very healthy way of thinking, don't they? They just seem to be naturally, I don't know, like somebody said, you may be born with it or whatever it is, you just have a very naturally good way of thinking or helpful one. I sometimes go for trips with a friend of mine, and we went down to London, as we often do once. We tend to go by train. And anyway, he had bought the train tickets. We share all the cost, everything, but he bought the train tickets fine and everything was good. And we had a nice day in London. We come back to St Pancras station and just arrive at the station, and he puts his hand in his pocket and he pulls out, there's only one ticket there. Should be, he bought the ticket, should be two. There's only one. So what did he say? He says, he says, I've lost your ticket. I've lost your ticket. And I couldn't help but say to him, I said, well, how would you know it's my ticket you've lost? You've got two tickets and one has disappeared, but that's mine that's gone. And when we sorted it out, of course, but I thought, isn't that a lovely way to think? You know, one ticket's gone, oh, that must be Will's ticket that's disappeared. So some people just have a great way of thinking. Mindfulness and distraction are normally good from the point of view of our well-being. Yeah, that is true. Little more to be said on it, really. It's thinking, it's mindfulness meditation when you observe things non-judgmentally. And if you want someone to guide you through your mindfulness meditation, if you search for Mark Williams and his publisher, Penguin Random House, you'll get all sorts of lovely good, you get 8 very good meditations or audios that you can download and use free of charge. Search for John Kabat-Zinn, likewise, or if you're used to me, then I've got a free one, which is very nice, on moodmaster.co.uk. So any of those, they're all free, they're all good mindfulness meditations. Distraction, we know that where you think about anything that absorbs your attention and is different from the thing that's distressing you. It's just such a robust strategy. Most people have heard of it, which makes it better, not teaching them new things, but to help people apply it is a really, really good thing in times of distress, to get immersed in anything that absorbs them, thinking about something, films, books, whatever.
What are your thoughts on distraction versus what the ACT principles say? Well,
the ACT principles you're probably thinking of really are mindfulness. That's Stephen Hayes is very keen on mindfulness, which in a sense is observing non-judgmentally. It's acceptance is a key element of mindfulness. And to accept things without being distressed by them is a fantastic ability. If you can do that, that is fantastic.
Super.
And finally, I think, is to treat yourself with compassion. Now, what Paul Gilbert has shown is that everything works a heck of a lot better if you take yourself through it compassionately, looking after yourself. And of course, there's great big long books written about compassion-focused therapy, and Paul Gilbert's book is probably the best, I think. But just to pull out a couple of things. One idea is to treat yourself as though you are recuperating from a serious illness. If you are going through a difficult time, if you're depressed or anxious or whatever it might be, to treat yourself as though you're recuperating from a serious illness. Treat yourself that gently and encouragingly and with proper thought. The other one I rather like is to treat yourself as though you are someone whose well-being you are responsible for. It's almost like jumping out of yourself and looking after yourself as though you're a third party. You are responsible for yourself. Other people might have, I thought when I was writing that other people might well have key things from compassion-focused therapy they might be very fond of.
I think Maya was looking at the previous slide when she was saying this. For her, in COVID-19, grounding techniques were really working, which keep you distracted.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. Yeah. Be interesting to have an example of the grounding techniques she found useful. But maybe that'll come in. So just to summarize then, what we do, the quality of our sleep, diet and exercise, and our relationships all influence our thinking. What we attribute events to is important for our well-being. It's good to attribute good events to permanent aspects of ourselves and negative events to transient aspects of things outside of ourselves. It's good to retread neural pathways that lead us to good places, not so good to retread ones that lead us to bad places. And that has implications for what we talk about, the music we listen to, the books we read, the films we watch, activities we get involved in, and so on. There's a huge difference between continuously thinking about something and problem solving. Continuously thinking about the problem that is besetting you doesn't work very well. Problem solving does. Mindfulness and distraction can both be excellent thought patterns. Okay. And finally, treat yourself with compassion as though you are responsible for the well-being of this person, or maybe as though you are recuperating. So there we are. There is the summary.
Rachel's come up with a nice one for your compassion one.
Yeah.
Apparently it's a quote for treating yourself like a toddler, which is good food, sleep, and talking to yourself nicely.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Isn't that nice?
It's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, for grounding technique, Jennifer's recommending the 5-4-3-2-1, which several people are also saying that works really well with them too.
Great. Great.
And Laura's asking, what if you don't know the problem that's bothering you?
You don't know the problem that's bothering you. Well, I think if you don't know it, then the best thing might be to talk to somebody else, see if you can tease it out by talking to somebody else about it.
Super. I hope that's okay, Laura.
Could be, of course, that you just feel bad with no particular problem concerning you. And that can be a sort of biological thing in terms of, not sleeping well enough, not eating well enough, not taking enough exercise or whatever it would be, or taking the wrong type. Or indeed, just exactly what we've been talking about, circuits just triggering off randomly and just making us feel bad. And that's why it's such a good idea to immerse ourselves in triggering off positive circuits, ones that make us feel good. And that's what repurposes those bad neurons.
Laura's just clarified that she was thinking of intrusive thoughts of feeling bad.
Yes, yes.
And what about really sad films or books, and you enjoy being sad?
Well, those are interesting, I think, because sometimes sad films and books and the lyrics of sad songs, they will validate your own personal experience. For example, there's a lot of sad love songs and so on, but they're not really just meant there to make us sad. They're there to validate experiences that loads of people have had. And so if the experience of being validated like that, many people find tremendous.
And James has suggested progressive muscle relaxation.
Yep. Well, again, on Moodmaster, I've put a progressive muscle relaxation strategy there.
Oh, fab. And Rachel said that in DBT, they recommend comparing yourself to those who are less well off.
Well, the research on that's interesting, actually, because that works very well for normal people, for average people, people who are not depressed enough to get classified as depressed. If you are depressed, to see other people who are even worse off makes you more depressed. It just emphasizes how bad the world is.
Are there any good books you can recommend on how human thoughts work and how to change negative thinking styles?
Yes, the one I always go to be honest, is the Overcoming series, because that's based on CBT, and to be honest, there's a lot of self-help books. I think what I would do is to the Overcoming series. I think is the best series of self-help books. But I think what I would do is get the look for self-help books, because they are very, very good at doing exactly that. And I choose a self-help book that's well rated and also focus on the area I'm interested in, whether it's OCD, depression, anxiety, whatever it is,
And Vita, sorry, I'm not sure if it's how I'm saying your name wrong, has recommended The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris.
Yes, which is all about ACT.
And Mind Over Mood from Vicky.
Yep.
Although you've recommended some good ones in another of the talks, didn't you? We went through some lovely books on the...
Yeah, well, I'm very fond of David Burns' self-help book, which title escapes me now, but it's sold about 10 million copies, so you don't have to look very far to find.
Is that the Feeling Good handbook, is it?
I think it is, yeah.
Brilliant. And Zahid has said that there are many good phone apps as well for mental well-being, like Calm, Headspace, and Wiser.
Oh, very much so, yes. I must admit, I think Headspace is really good.
Super.
Okie dokie.
Okay. All done?
All done. Oh, you're on mute, Amesy.
Sorry, I think the big lemon distracted me. This is completely free of charge as part of our response to COVID-19. And thank you so much for attending. It's so nice to see so many of you here all again. And if you've attended for most of the session, we'll email you a certificate of attendance by the end of next week. And this is the last of the All You Need to Know series. Next week, there will be major therapeutic interventions in mental health, compassion-focused therapy, which sounds rather fabulous. So I hope to see you all then.
Lovely.
All done well?
All done. Lovely. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Amy.
All right. Thanks, Will. See you later.
See you.
Bye.